The desert does not forgive. It does not negotiate. It does not pause. It simply takes, and it keeps taking until there is nothing left. Imagine a column of people, not dozens, not hundreds, 2 million souls stretching as far as the eye can see across the shimmering heat of the Sinai wilderness. Children crying, old men stumbling, the sound of grief rising like smoke into a bleached and indifferent sky. They had escaped slavery. They had walked through a sea that split open like a wound. They had watched the greatest empire on earth collapse behind them in walls of churning water. They were free. And yet, here, in the merciless desert, freedom looked almost exactly like death. Behind them, nothing. Ahead of them, nothing. Around them, scorpions, venomous serpents, choking dust storms, and a silence so vast it could swallow a man's sanity whole. And in their midst, a plague, invisible, pitiless, racing through the camp like fire through dry grass. 14,700 people had already fallen. The bodies were barely cold before the next cries began. Somewhere in that chaos, somewhere between the bodies and the prayers and the smoke of desperate offerings, a man sat down, and he wrote. What he wrote would survive him by 3,000 years. What he wrote would be carried into every battlefield in human history, whispered over the dying, pressed into the fists of soldiers, recited in hospital corridors, tattooed onto skin, and memorized by children before they understood a single word of it. What he wrote was Psalm 91, and this is the story of why. To understand Psalm 91, you cannot simply read it. You must go back. You must stand where its author stood, in the wilderness, in the crisis, in the dust, and feel what it cost to say those words out loud. The ancient Hebrew title of this poem gives no author's name. The text simply begins, no preamble, no introduction, as if the urgency of the moment allowed no time for pleasantries. But Jewish tradition, stretching all the way back through the Talmud, through the great rabbinical academies of Babylon, through thousands of years of oral transmission, holds that Psalm 91 was written by Moses. Specifically, that it was written as a companion piece to Psalm 90, which Moses himself authored, and which begins with those haunting words, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. The Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, produced more than 2 centuries before the birth of Christ, formally attributes Psalm 91 to Moses. Early church fathers accepted this. The Babylonian Talmud in the Tractate of Shavuot references it. Even modern scholars, who remain skeptical of a single authorship, acknowledge that the 2 Psalms, 90 and 91, form an unmistakable literary and theological pair, written in the same ancient voice, shaped by the same singular catastrophic experience. That experience was the wilderness, not the wilderness of poetry or metaphor, the literal wilderness. 40 years of wandering in one of the most hostile environments on the face of the earth, the Sinai Peninsula, a triangular expanse of granite mountain, shifting sand and killing heat, wedged between the Mediterranean Sea to the north and the Red Sea to the south, a land bridge between Africa and Asia that, in antiquity, was considered the very edge of the known world, the place you went when the world had expelled you. Moses knew this terrain better than anyone alive. He had spent 40 years before the Exodus shepherding flocks through its corridors. He knew where the water was. He knew where the serpents nested. He knew where men disappeared and were never found again. And now, in the final chapters of his impossible mission, he watched his people fall apart within it. The book of Numbers, Bamidbar in Hebrew, meaning in the wilderness, reads like a war diary from the edge of collapse. Plague follows plague. Rebellion follows rebellion. In Numbers 16, a man named Korah leads 250 community leaders in open revolt against Moses, challenging his authority before the entire congregation. The earth splits open and swallows the rebels alive. And then, as if the horror of that judgment were not enough, a plague breaks out in the panicking crowd. Aaron, Moses' own brother, runs through the congregation with burning incense, physically placing himself between the living and the dead to stop the contagion from spreading. 14,700 people died in that single episode. These were not strangers to Moses. These were people he had bargained with Pharaoh to free, people he had prayed over, legislated for, fed with bread from heaven, watered from a rock. And they were dying around him, not in battle, not with honor, but in confusion and plague and despair. In Numbers 21, the crises continue. The people speak against God and against Moses in exhaustion and bitterness, and a plague of venomous serpents sweeps through the camp. The ancient text describes the snakes as Hanachashim Haseraphim, the burning serpents, whose bite causes a consuming fire in the bloodstream. People are dying so quickly that even prayer feels inadequate. Moses prays anyway. This is the man, this is the moment, this is the world in which Psalm 91 was born. Not in a palace, not in comfort, not in the peace of reflection, but in the eye of a recurring, compounding, catastrophic storm. And then he writes, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty." Those first words are not theology, they are testimony. They are a man staking something, not a doctrine, not an argument, but his life and his faith in a single, unblinking declaration. The Hebrew word translated as shelter is sata. Sata. It does not mean a building. It does not mean a fortress with walls and battlements. It means a hiding place, a concealed space. The word was used in ancient Hebrew for the spot where a hunter would crouch before dawn, waiting, hidden, covered, unseen. The very first line of this poem is a declaration that God is not merely a God of grand power. He is a God close enough to hide within. And then Moses introduces 4 ancient names of God in the opening verses, stacking them like layers of armor. Elyon, the Most High, the supreme sovereign over every earthly power. Shaddai, El Shaddai, the Almighty, whose name in the ancient Semitic world carried connotations of overwhelming, inexhaustible sufficiency. HWH, the personal covenant name, the God who had made promises and kept them, the God of the burning bush and the parted sea. And Elohim, the Creator, the God of all things that exist. In a single breath, Moses invokes every dimension of the divine he has ever encountered. He is not being theologically exhaustive for the sake of a seminary lecture. He is desperate. He is reaching for every name he knows because the danger is that great. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Notice the shift. The psalm begins in the third person. He who dwells, as if Moses is describing someone else, perhaps instructing his people, speaking as a teacher. But then, without warning, the voice becomes deeply, shockingly personal. I will say of the Lord. This is no longer instruction. This is confession. This is a man declaring his own position, his own allegiance, his own act of trust in the face of what surrounds him. The imagery that follows is drawn with extraordinary precision from the physical realities of life in the ancient Near Eastern wilderness. Surely, He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. A fowler was a bird, hunter, someone who set concealed traps along the ground, invisible to the unsuspecting creature walking past. In the ancient world, this metaphor would have landed with visceral immediacy. Everyone in that wilderness camp knew what it was to walk through terrain where the danger was not announced, not visible, not preceded by warning. The serpent did not declare itself. The plague did not knock. The rebellion did not send an envoy. The trap was always already set before you knew it was there. And pestilence, deva in Hebrew, was the word used throughout the ancient world for epidemic disease, the very word that haunted Egypt, the very word that had stalked the Israelite camp through countless crises in the wilderness. This was not metaphor. Moses was writing about something he had watched with his own eyes, something that had already taken tens of thousands of people he knew by name. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. Here, the language shifts from warrior imagery to something achingly tender. The image is of a mother bird. In the ancient Middle East, The eagle was the supreme symbol of protective power, and its behavior of spreading great wings over its young against the desert storms was a widely recognized image of sheltering care. But in this context, for these people, it spoke to something even more primal. The memory of being held, of being small and covered, of danger existing outside the one who holds you. Moses was writing for a broken people, not just a frightened people, a broken people. People who had tasted slavery so long they did not fully believe in their own dignity. People who had watched the ground swallow their neighbors. People who lay awake in their tents at night, listening for the sound of serpents in the dark. And he told them, "You are not alone under this open sky. You are under wings. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday." This verse is a four-part structure, and it is not accidental. Moses covers the full compass of human fear, night and day, the hidden and the open. He is systematically dismantling the architecture of dread. In the ancient Near Eastern world, the terror of night, Pashad Laila, was not merely a poetic expression. The night was genuinely, physically terrifying. In the Sinai wilderness without shelter, the darkness was absolute. Predators moved. Scorpions emerged from beneath rocks. Raiding parties from hostile tribes crept close. Disease seemed to claim more lives after the sun went down, when the fever spiked and the cold settled in. Ancient Semitic cultures also believed that demonic forces operated with particular intensity at night. The word pachad, terror, is the same word used in ancient Akkadian and Ugaritic texts to describe the paralyzing dread that precedes catastrophe, and then the arrow that flies by day. Military historians note that the Israelite wilderness journey was not peaceful. They were repeatedly ambushed. The Amalekites attacked the rear of the column, preying on the weakest. The Canaanite king of Arad launched raids. The Moabites hired Balaam to curse them. The danger was not merely spiritual. It was military, tactical, and brutally physical. The arrow was the ancient world's long-range weapon of assassination. Silent, sudden, coming from a concealed position, cutting down life before the target could even understand what had happened. Moses writes through it all. He doesn't diminish the danger. He doesn't say, "There are no arrows, no plagues, no serpents, no terror." He says, "You will not be consumed by fear of them." There is a profound psychological sophistication here. The acknowledgement that danger is real, combined with the assertion that the soul's response to danger does not have to be paralysis. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. This is one of the most striking verses in the entire poem, and one of the most misunderstood. It is not a promise that the believer will never suffer. The landscape of the wilderness itself refutes that reading. Moses is writing surrounded by corpses. He watched 14,700 people die. He is not writing from a position of immunity. What he is writing is something far more complex and far more honest. That proximity to devastation does not have to mean personal dissolution. That a person can stand in the presence of catastrophic loss, at the mass grave, at the hospital bedside, in the aftermath of ruin, and still not be destroyed by it. The ancient Hebrew understanding of "it will not come near you" carried a specific meaning. It will not touch your essential self, your core, your covenant identity. This was the gift Moses was trying to give his people, not physical invincibility, spiritual indestructibility. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Centuries later, in a far different wilderness encounter, these specific words would be taken off the lips of a wandering man and placed into the mouth of the most dangerous intelligence in Scripture. When Satan tempted Jesus of Nazareth in the wilderness of Judea, as recorded in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 4, it was Psalm 91, verses 11 and 12, that the adversary chose to quote. He recited them to the Son of God himself, twisting them into an invitation to presumption. Jump from the temple, and the angels will catch you. The fact that Satan knew this psalm, the fact that Satan chose this psalm, speaks to something scholars and theologians have wrestled with for 2,000 years. That Psalm 91 is a text so powerful, so cosmically significant, that even the forces of darkness feel the need to engage with it. They cannot ignore it. They can only try to corrupt it. Then something extraordinary happens in the structure of the poem. The voice changes. For 10 verses, we have heard Moses, or a human voice of faith, declaring what God will do, describing what the sheltered soul will experience. But beginning at verse 14, the poem breaks into something unprecedented in ancient poetry. God himself speaks, directly, in the first person, as if the poem has been a conversation all along, and now it is the Almighty's turn to answer. Because he loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue him, I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. The Hebrew word used here for loves is hashak, chashak. It does not mean the casual affection of a passing acquaintance. It means to cling to be bound by desire. It is the language of longing, of a love so deep it bends the self toward its object. In the ancient world, this was the language used for covenantal love, the love between parties who had made an oath, who had staked their survival on mutual fidelity. Moses is declaring, in essence, the qualification for this protection is not perfection. It is not a spotless record. It is not magnificent achievement. It is love. It is the desperate, clinging, honest love of a soul that has nowhere else to go. And God answers that love with 6 specific promises. He will rescue him. The Hebrew palette, to bring out of danger, to pull clear of a collapsing situation. He will protect him, sagav, to set him in an inaccessible high place, beyond the reach of what pursues him. He will answer him when he calls, not eventually, not after deliberation, but answer. He will be with him in trouble, not watching from a distance, not sending a representative, but present, personally present in the disaster. He will deliver and honor him, the arc of rescue completing not in mere survival, but in dignity. And finally, with breathtaking tenderness, with long life I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. The word for long life in Hebrew is aorek yamim, orek yamim. Its literal meaning is length of days. And the word for salvation is wishva, Yeshua, the very root of the name Joshua, the very root of the name Jesus. The salvation that would one day take on flesh and walk into yet another wilderness. Moses, at the edge of his own long life, writing in the shadow of his own approaching death, for he would never himself enter the promised land, reaches for a word whose full meaning he would never see completed. He writes Yeshua into the final line of this psalm, and the word would echo forward through 1,500 years until it became a name. There is something almost unbearable about that when you sit with it long enough. Moses died on the summit of Mount Nebo, overlooking the Jordan River, within sight of the land he would never enter. According to the text of Deuteronomy, he was 120 years old, and his eyes were undimmed. He had carried his people from the mud pits of Egypt through 40 years of fire and water and plague and rebellion and grief. He had been the singular human instrument through which an entire nation received its identity, its law, its covenant, its God. He never entered Canaan, but Psalm 91 did, and it kept going. In the ancient synagogues of the Second Temple period, this psalm was recited every Sabbath. It was known formally as the Song of Plagues, a liturgical bulwark against epidemic and evil. Jewish soldiers in the Hasmonean armies carried fragments of it. The Dead Sea Scrolls community at Qumran used Psalm 91 in their exorcism rituals. They believed its words held power over evil spirits, naming them and dismissing them. When plague swept through the Roman Empire in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, the early Christians prayed it in their underground churches. Medieval monks inscribed its verses on amulets and door lintels. Crusaders recited it before battle. African American congregations in the antebellum South whispered it in the dark of slavery, finding in Moses' wilderness cry an exact mirror of their own. During the First World War, a British regiment famously carried a printed copy of Psalm 91 into the trenches of the Western Front, and soldiers passed around the claim, whether myth or miracle, that those who carried it came home. During the Second World War, mothers on both sides of the Atlantic pressed folded copies into the breast pockets of their sons. It became known across military history as the Soldier's Psalm. Billy Graham prayed it at bedsides. Corrie ten Boom, imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp, recited it in the barracks. Nelson Mandela's supporters prayed it during the long darkness of apartheid. In the weeks following the September 11 attacks, clergy of every tradition read it at memorial services across New York City. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it circulated on social media more than perhaps any other piece of ancient writing, people recognizing in its words about pestilence and plague, something that felt less like ancient poetry and more like a current news report. Why? Why this particular poem? Why these specific words? Because Psalm 91 does not promise a world without darkness. It promises a presence within the darkness. It was not written by someone sitting in safety, imagining what danger might feel like. It was written by someone standing inside the danger, breathing the air of it, watching the people around him fall, and choosing, in that specific and unrepeatable moment, to declare that something greater than the danger was also present. That is why it has lasted. That is why it travels. Not because it offers an escape from the human condition, but because it speaks from within the human condition, from its most exposed and terrifying depths, and says, even here, there is shelter. There is a woman in a hospital waiting room right now, staring at a phone with news she doesn't know how to carry. There is a soldier in a forward operating base somewhere in the world, rereading a letter from home by lamplight. There is a father who has just been told that his child is sick. There is a refugee walking through terrain that, if you stripped away 3,000 years, would look almost exactly like the Sinai. They may not know who Moses was. They may not know the wilderness of Sinai, or the rebellion of Korah, or the plague of the burning serpents, or the crisis behind the crisis that produced these words. But when they reach for Psalm 91, they are reaching for the same thing Moses reached for in the desert. Not information, not philosophy, not comfort in the thin sense of the word, but contact. The sense that the thing that holds the universe together is also, somehow, personally aware of them, personally present with them. He will cover you with his feathers. Under his wings you will find refuge, 3,000 years. And still, those words do something to the human nervous system that cannot be fully explained. They slow something down. They open something, as if the body, at some deep level, recognizes the truth in them before the mind has time to evaluate the claim. This is the miracle of Psalm 91. Not that it predicts invincibility, but that it was written at all. That in the middle of catastrophe, in the middle of grief, in the middle of a desert that was consuming his people, a man found the courage to say out loud to anyone who would listen, I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge. That choice, to speak trust in the language of the desperate, to call something shelter when the sky is open and the ground is killing and the darkness is real. That choice is the bravest sentence in the Bible. It was written for people who had nothing left, and it has always found them. Moses gave it to the wilderness. The wilderness gave it to the world, and the world has never put it down. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. Psalm 91, verse 1, written somewhere in the Sinai, approximately 1400 BC. Author, unknown. Audience, everyone.